Like, well, where do you want us to sit? Because we could chase everything. We could TMO check every single thing in the game to find out, was it cynical, was it not? Was it dangerous, was it not? And but I don't think anybody wants that.
And if you're not watching it on TV, you've not got the ref mic, you haven't got the commentators talking through it. And so giving that piece to the fans, you can see that that's something that's really engaging with them.
I think you'd struggle to find anyone that doesn't think that was an absolute disaster, what happened in that game with the technology.
Is there an over-reliance within TMOs on the use of slow motion replays?
And welcome to episode 3 of the Players Podcast, the podcast that delves into the issues facing the game of rugby for the players. My name is Owen, and as always, I'm joined by ERPA Chief of Rugby Operations Conrad Smith and Head of Women's Rugby Rachel Burford. But today we're joined by a special guest, a former ref who's now working with World Rugby to coach international referees and improve performances at the test match level. Before that, he was a Super Rugby ref and at international level himself, both at the 2019 and 2023 Rugby World Cups. A very warm welcome to Mr. Brendon Pickerill.
Thanks very much, Owen. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brendon, I was at albeit a community match recently, and somebody said to me afterwards, who would be a referee these days? And I said, that's a great way to open the show. So maybe just give us a bit of background about yourself and what inspired you to pick up the whistle.
Yeah, I suppose that's a fair question. With what referees have to deal with, whether that's community, professional level. But no, look, I think there's a lot of great stuff about being a referee. And look, from my perspective, why did I get into it? It was simply just a love of the game. So out of the back of playing rugby at club in New Zealand, and then enjoying the game, picking up the whistle because there was a match in the morning that needed a referee. Maybe the referee hadn't shown up, or possibly they didn't give referees down to a certain level. So I just went out there, tried it. A bit like Conrad, I think. I know he's doing a little bit of that sort of community stuff as well at the moment, but did that, really enjoyed it. And after a couple of years decided well, maybe if I stop playing and I try to take this refereeing thing a bit more seriously, there might be some opportunities there. So if I could boil it down to one thing, it was really just a love of the game of rugby.
So you're now with World Rugby. Give us a bit of insight into what your day-to-day is like, and also what you're at currently this week, just ahead of the November internationals.
Yeah, so my role with World Rugby is the match official coach. So I'm working with the referees around the windows, post-match, basically just to try and get better, to try and look at the performances, work with the group that we've got, looking at growing our performance, how we can work together better as a team, how the referee can take more leadership on the field. Very much what a team would have a coach there working with the referees. That's essentially the job that I've been moved into at World Rugby. That's why I hung up the whistle to come to this opportunity. And I've been here about 18 months now, and I'm really enjoying a change to be on the other side of our environment. But yeah, working with the match officials to help grow their performances. So that's sort of what my role entails. But right at the moment, I am up in London. So we've got a match official camp ahead of the November internationals. So we're here at a hotel in London, and we've been working over the last couple of days for the theme of our match official camp this year is alignment, accountability, and growth. So basically, like any team, you bring a group of players together, maybe from a domestic environment into an international environment, working to get alignment around how we'll referee the game this window and moving forward, to bring some accountability. The referees were out there doing some fitness testing today. They've got a law test tomorrow. So making sure that we're doing the work to be at the standard we need to be for international rugby, and then growth. So just talking to each other. We've got a whole lot of experts here working with us, a range of support to try and help the match officials grow their performance capability.
Conrad, do you want to just talk a little bit about the calibration calls, where the idea came from, and how you work with Brendon?
Yeah, I think so. The calibration call, I think we talked a little bit about these on the last pod. It was They were a World Rugby initiative, essentially to achieve what Brendon's talking about, alignment, that word like we want, ideally, everyone seeing the same picture and agreeing. So that's from match officials to players, coaches, fans, even judicial officers, everyone agreeing on, if it's in the case of high tackles, what is a high tackle and what the sanction should be. And we talked last week, and I'm sure we'll talk again, how difficult that can be. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't spend some time trying to get alignment. And so the calibration call was the idea of getting the stakeholders I mentioned all together once every couple of months to look at video clips of foul play, bring people together, and then talk through what the decision should be. So we'd review what the decision was, what we think the decision should be, and then out of that, the idea is also to share those sort of decisions and even those videos with the wider rugby community to sort of say, how that decision's been reached, why it's been reached. A useful initiative, but if anything, it's probably just illustrated how difficult, particularly around high tackles, that is, and how tough the job is for the match official who's in the middle making a call at the heat of the moment. It's hard enough, with the luxury of a bit of time looking at something over and over, but to be in the middle making it in the heat of the moment, it's not an enviable task.
It'd be the hardest part of the job, Brendon, is it?
It is a difficult part of the job, but like Conrad says, there's work being put in to build that alignment all of the time. Ultimately, we want to put the work in so the match officials are doing a good job in this space. We're aligned in terms of the other stakeholders, as Conrad says, how they expect the game should be officiated, and there's a range of people that put input into that. So, from our perspective, we're not trying to just go out and deliver what we want. We're trying to deliver what the game wants, and the game is, that's dictated by a range of relevant stakeholders, as Conrad says, that are represented on these calibration calls.
I think just another point to add to those calls is the input from coaches around what their players could be doing differently, how they might coach differently as well. So it's looking at the alignment around decisions, but there's also the aspect of, well, how do we get these behaviours and changes amongst players as well?
And then I suppose to throw another part in, and I know, again, we talked about this a little bit last week, but would you agree, like, Brendon, this would be interesting to get your view on this, but where the role of, like, the fan is around this? Like, we talk about the stakeholders in the game, and everyone would say pretty quickly, players, fans, referees, but then when we have these groups, like the one I just mentioned, the calibration group, we don't ever have a fan, and that might be for obvious reasons, but we don't have anyone in the group saying, we just want this decision made quickly. The fan just wants the decision made as quickly as possible and then get on with the game. We want it to be the right decision, but that perspective, I know, and this is not just within the calibration group, I think this is a challenge for our whole sport. Like, where do we bring in the view of the fan? And although we're conscious of that, do we need almost a independent representation within groups, within World Rugby or that calibration group, just sort of giving that perspective?
I think the game is pulled in different directions. Like, there's different drivers into the game of rugby, whether that be safety of the players, which obviously drives us to sanction certain things, foul play, the head contact process, calibration calls, as we've touched on. But then there's this whole fairness or equity piece, which is demanded quite strongly by coaches. So maybe people out there listening might not realize coaches are quite demanding around the game being refereed according to the rules, to make sure that it's a fair contest between these two sides. So that sort of fairness equity driver is quite strong there. Then you get, as you're saying, Conrad, a continuity, a flow, or a spectacle driver, which is often what fans would demand. Like, they want to watch a product that's entertaining, that they can, sit down on their couch and enjoy. So I think there's sort of three major drivers: safety, the fairness, and then that flow. And it's our job as custodians of the game to balance that in the right way, that we have a game, or we have a product that sort of satisfies those three things. And if we get out of balance, I think that's where it doesn't make sense. Now, it would be pretty interesting. We have these shape of the game conferences, which are designed to keep evolving the game, keep improving the product. It would be interesting if we invited a few friends, Conrad, to up to the next conference and maybe win a trip to World Rugby and come and contribute in these meetings. But look, I hope that most players, most coaches, and certainly CEOs can sort of take that lens. I think everybody at the end of the day is a fan of the game. Particularly CEOs who are in that room, they understand the financial implication of what the shape of the game needs to look like to bring in the new generation, to keep fans, to keep the game relevant, really. So, yeah, I think we're pretty well represented, and hopefully we can bring that perspective. But yeah, bringing the fans to that meeting would be quite an interesting idea.
Because I know what you mean, and we're always quick. I think as players, we like to think we're very aligned with the fans. Like if the fan enjoys the game, the player enjoys the game, and vice versa. But I think there is still something to be said around that independent representation of what the fan wants. Like, because you even go to the equity, a lot of the time the players, they want the right decision, even if that means it's an extra 30 seconds on the TMO, whereas the fan probably wants to take that 30 seconds back and just have a decision, even if the margin of error is higher. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, and look, I'm not suggesting we've got enough people on those calls and shape of the game meetings to invite a random fan, but I think that could be an interesting prospect. But I just, it's just such a challenge for the game, and I know other sports face this, and it's, I think, a question we always need to ask of ourselves: are we prioritising the fan? Like, that's what we want. We want to grow the game. We want more and more people watching the game, and so how do we always give the voice to their perspective?
That's interesting though as well with fans. I don't know what you think, Rachel, but some fans, to some fans, a nice, like a contestable game. It doesn't matter about the score. You know, it might be 9-6, but it was a really even contest and it kept you on the edge of your seat. To some fans, that's entertainment. But then to others, and maybe in different parts of the world, no, it's about lots of tries and ball and play. So that's certainly what I've experienced in my role. We have a global game, and we actually have different demands from different parts of the world, different cultures, different competitions, and bringing that together is certainly a challenge.
Yeah, I would certainly agree. There's obviously such a wide range of fans that view it in a very different way, and the entertainment factor is very different. I was at a England versus Ireland Six Nations women's game, and England were hammering Ireland. Sorry, Owen, to just remind you of that. But and as a purist and as somebody who's played the game at a high level, I wanted that really close, tight contest. But then when I looked around the stadium, everyone was just on their feet, enjoying the flow of the game, the multiple tries, and so it's a hard thing to balance, isn't it? Trying to get all the right stakeholders to their level. It's always going to have some compromise. But I think a good example of bringing the fans in, and there's been so much positive feedback, is about the stadium announcement 2 decisions as well. Because you're not often, if you're not watching it on TV, you're not got the ref mic, you haven't got the commentators talking through it. And so giving that piece to the fans, you can see that that's something that's really engaging with them.
Yeah, there's law changes happening all the time around evolving the game, and you say like innovations like in stadium communication to the fans in the bowl. That's happening this November. So we've had things like ref cam introduced. We've had all sorts of things from our perspective as referees pushed towards us, asked of us. You look at the 20-minute red card, the off-field review process. There'll be tweaks, I'm sure, as we keep moving forward. But yeah, it's interesting to really watch the game evolve, and I think it's always done with really good intent. Conrad, as you say, like we're being mindful of all of the stakeholders in the game and trying to achieve the right balance.
And you mentioned a 20-minute red card there, which we discussed at length last week on the podcast. How, in World Rugby, in your camp with the other refs, how do you feel that's gone? And also the bunker system as well, because it came up at the weekend. Not to pick on one particular issue, but in general, Are you happy with it? Has it been a positive experience for referees?
Yeah, like I mean, I don't want to. I guess it's not so much for me to say if it's a positive or a negative for the game. I can talk to, when it came in, I think there was the 20-minute red card. There was some apprehension from certain people. How does that work? Oh, well, will we see more foul play because the sanction for a red card is being reduced? In the end, I think most stakeholders came on board like, let's put this into trial, which it is now. And I think, my personal opinion, it's been a positive. I think if there's an advertisement for that, like as you say, the Ireland New Zealand game in the weekend, when we have a 20-minute red card, but after 20 minutes the team is back to 15 players, and that's the strong argument for the 20-minute red card, is that the spectacle isn't ruined because we're not playing 14 on 15 for an extended period of time. Now, it's just really about the calibration of what sits in a yellow card, sits in a 20-minute red card, and what now sits in a permanent red card. And, we've got to keep doing work around that to make sure that we get that balance right.
I think on this topic, because I know we started discussing this last week, but the role of sanctioning, because I know we've talked about this before, Brennan, and you've sort of mentioned already that the role of the referee is really to do what the wider game wants, like what sort of behaviours we want to sanction. And if I think of some good examples of where the sanctioning is used really, really well, I think of the tip tackle that, we were seeing in the game probably 5-10 years ago, but came down harshly on a clear action that we saw with the rule came in, legs above horizontal, that was going to be dealt with really, really harshly. And you hardly see a tip tackle nowadays. A croc roll. I think we had a clip, an action that came into the game. We saw players using it. Maybe it was coached. We don't really know. But the sanctioning, law change was brought in, used really, really well. Do you agree, like there are specific actions in the game that there is a sanction has a really strong place, and yet there are others which I think really it involves a wider approach to deal with, and I'm meaning here around the high tackle. So a high tackle, much harder to define. Like, yes, there's the contact to the head, but then you're looking at the actions of the ball carrier, the actions of the tackler, and all these, and you see it in the process itself. You have mitigating factors, you have degrees of danger, all these other elements, which straight away suggests to me that it's not going to be a sanction-only approach to attack that particular action in the game. Are you following me here? So sorry if I'm this is a little bit long-winded, but do you agree, like where there are specific actions, sanctions work really, really well?
Yeah, I agree. And the croc roll, I mean, you point to lifting tackles. I would also say like collisions in the air, trying to change behavior of wingers chasing a high ball to make sure that they don't go underneath the opposition catcher to put them in a very dangerous position. So often, all of the time, I think this stuff is done for very good reasons. Now, I suppose it's a misconception. It's not referees wanting to go out there and we just decide to do this and we're going to launch an attack on certain things. It's the game coming together. And in the instance of croc rolls, which you mentioned, there were concerns from players and coaches about serious knee injuries, putting players out for 9 to 12 months. Knee, ankle injuries from croc rolls, the technique to drive into a ruck, drop your body weight on his back and twist. And so, look, if we look at this clip here, that Owen's playing. So in the Australia-New Zealand game recently, we've got the Australian player coming in, wrapping around the body of Jordie Barrett and then twisting and dropping his body weight onto the leg. And immediately you see Jordie Barrett coming back, holding his knee. He's clearly injured. It's and you look at that, it's sort of it's hard to watch sometimes, these incidents. I think everybody would say that's not a safe action to have in the game. And you talk about sanctioning. It is definitely the right approach on this, Conrad, but behind the scenes with that, how that plays out is the game comes together. We want to eliminate this action. What are we going to do? We introduce sanctions for it. There is some education with coaches. This is coming. We need to retrain the player behavior in trainings. You might be able to speak to this better than me, but I assume there's education coming from your organization through to the players, and ultimately it's a team effort to try get this out of the game. So the Australia-New Zealand clip in the Rugby Championship, that was a rare incident. I think it's not, there were croc rolls happening quite a lot in the game. Through the back half of 2024, we were able to eliminate a lot of those out through being strong, through yellow cards, through 20-minute red cards. And it's happening less and less in the game, which I think is a positive. Now, if you look at high tackles, for example, it is a bit of a different challenge. World Rugby's been through a process, initially a high tackle framework, then the head contact process, which has been involved in itself over time. And I think we're getting more consistency around how that's applied. But as you say, there's a lot of things on there. There's a lot of factors that can happen in a tackle, like the dynamics of it, the actions of the ball carrier themselves. Did they contribute to any of this? The actions of the tackler, are they upright? Are they bent? Are they coming in a dynamic way? Are they passive? Like, there's a lot of factors that are built into the head contact process to try and arrive at sanctions that are followable, but also incentivizing players to get their tackle height right, to target parts of the body that aren't near the head. And then if you take that away from tackles and then go actually into the clean out, there's a whole nother challenge again. So, I think I can follow what you're saying there, Conrad. And look, we just keep being guided by what the game wants and doing our best to implement that.
Brendon, one of the things you're talking about, I know at the camp with the referees in London at the moment, you're looking at cynical play, which is another one of those things we want to get out of the game. Talk to me around the issues there.
Yeah, so this is not obviously a safety issue, but this is where I talk about the other driver, equity and fairness. Now, so at our camp, we're constantly looking at what the match officials have done well or haven't done well in previous windows. And you mentioned cynical play there. We've had a session today with our match officials on this exact topic. So we're just looking at different actions around, because we know, Conrad, Rachel, I'm sure in your time you've probably done something deliberately at the bottom of a ruck to just slow the ball down a little bit much, or maybe haven't quite been back 10 metres and make the tackle anyway. So we know players absolutely push the boundaries to see what they can get away with. In some way, it's actually part of our game, I think. We have to uphold the laws, but as we know, players constantly push those boundaries, and in some ways we say the players that are able to get away with it the best are often, that's good rugby. So if we watch this clip here, this is a clip we used today where, that looks just like a knock on by South Africa at the back of the ruck. We can see there the players are sort of talking and upset about that, and say to the referee, there was a hand in there. So at the bottom of this ruck, there's a hand from a New Zealand player to reach over and disrupt the ball at the back of that ruck. So here's the replay coming now. We're looking at the balls available for South Africa, and now there's a hand there from New Zealand, and he just does just enough that it's pretty subtle, it's pretty sneaky, but look, it's a deliberate action. It's really disrupted South Africa, and it's those kind of actions that we're trying to calibrate on and make sure, firstly, that we agree that is a deliberate action at the bottom of that ruck. There's a whole lot of other types of cynical play, but secondly, how as a match official team do we pick this up? Because this was missed in the game, and obviously, that can have an impact because a cynical play, the player should be yellow carded. Then there's the opportunity for that team to play against 14 for the next 10 minutes. So these are moments we want to get right, but by our own admission, we don't always get them right. So we've just got to keep evolving our processes, which is exactly what we're doing. Ironically, at the same weekend in Australia, there was a very similar one here. I don't think the players even noticed what had happened here, but when the replay came in, there was a little hand from Argentina on the ground.
Did?
Yeah, just to disrupt enough. So, yeah, looking here. This one I think is a bit more subtle, but there is a hand in there just to dislodge it. So we're looking at these kind of things just to try and make sure that, again, we're upholding not only the safety in the game, but the fairness and making sure that the teams basically aren't cheating because, it's pretty frustrating, I can imagine, for players if you're on the receiving end of that. You've got a good attacking play and then something deliberate happens and kills all your momentum and nothing's done about it.
Just looking at those examples, is there not because I completely agree, and I think even players would agree that we push the letter, we understand that, and I think there's dumb decisions that some players make that need to be sanctioned. And you talk about, I think of while I was playing, they came down really hard. Might have been yourself as a referee, Brendon, for throwing the ball away. That was a real, wasting of time tactic. If the opposition had got a penalty and you had the ball, you sort of threw it away so they couldn't take a quick tap, which is totally, it's against the spirit of the game. Easy thing to see, easy thing to penalise. You could let it go, but I think it was welcomed when referees started penalising or marching, another 10 metres for players that would throw the ball away. Is there a danger? I just looked at those little acts because you're never going to pick all of them up, are we? There's going to be instances of the game where people, some older players that are masters of the dark arts, they're gonna do little things. Yeah, because I just worry that rugby, we're never going to have a perfect game, and so if we're picking up clear and obvious ones, that's okay. But if we're going to slow the game down again, we're then getting into that territory where we talked about the TMO, where we might be chasing this perfect game that doesn't ever exist. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the TMO is a good example where, on one hand, people want a flowing game, don't really want the TMO over involved, but on the other hand, there's a whole other set of stakeholders that want us to be accurate, want us to get the right outcome. The impact of the game and the yellow card, especially. They want that outcome right. So it is such a balance, Conrad, and we've got to navigate that. If the and I suppose that's where we search for understanding from the game, where do you want us to sit? Because we could chase everything. We could TMO check every single thing in the game to find out, was it cynical, was it not? Was it dangerous, was it not? And but I don't think anybody wants that. So yes, I'm sure things will be continued to be subtle, things will be continued to be missed. And the other thing is the game is constantly evolving. We'll do one thing this November, the coaches and players will adapt and do something slightly different to get away with another thing. So I think that's just the game, is being ahead, being innovative. You've seen what certain teams are doing around pushing the law to the absolute limit. So I think somehow rugby as a sport, I mean, the beauty of it is it can be played in different ways by, depending on the strengths of certain nations. Some teams will push boundaries absolutely with this kind of stuff. Some will decide, no, we want to be extremely disciplined. So, I think it's a challenge. We're not asking our TMOs to, what we would say, chase marginal things. We're trying to live in the space of clear and obvious. But there are some clear and obvious cynical things happening in the game that we should be picking up, and we should be upholding the integrity of the rules, so that ultimately it's down to the fairness between the two teams. If one team does something, we might say a player does a stupid action or a deliberate action, they deserve to be punished with that. So it's all a balance. I feel like I've used that word a little bit already on this podcast, but I think the game is balancing these different perspectives in the right way.
Brendon, pretty much a lot of what we've talked about is alignment and consistency, and we're exploring the idea around use of common language as well. Referees, I think, use it is probably the most universal language we know in the game from every referee around the world. That's probably the most common thing that we hear consistently. But it's like, how do we also bring that into the game as well? Like around the breakdown, there could be so many different ways that you can say, leave the ball, hands away, no more, but all mean the same thing, but are being interpreted in different ways. And this actually came out from players' feedback around not speaking English, but them being the terms that are being used. So having that common language actually helped them as a team to understand, which reduced their penalty counts, improved their performance. So it's an important factor for us to consider, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And when that was raised, I've had conversations with yourself and Conrad around this previously, and I found that really interesting. And that's exactly how this should work. Is if that's the feedback from the players and that's what the game wants, well, then we should make an effort to work on this as a project to get match officials more aligned around what they're saying, or the language, maybe not only for match officials but in the game in general. So it's interesting because I suppose the game, with the game, we've got a global game and it is played in different ways around the world. I look at one small example, down in the southern hemisphere would say playing the ball on the ground, and in the northern hemisphere you'd say playing the ball on the floor. So to me, the floor is indoors, so I don't quite understand that, but everybody up in the north says on the floor. So like, there's just small examples like this, which I've never really considered, but like you say, hands away, leave it, no, don't go there, whatever referees are saying, developing some consistency around that. And I think that's a good collaboration piece between what could be done between match officials and players, just to understand what is the best language, what do we need to say. And if that's the feedback is that that's going to help the game, then absolutely we should commit to that and certainly try to drive some alignment. I think a lot of the language or some of the language we use comes directly from the law book. You mentioned use it, that's in the law book. So perhaps we should try and drive our language to be as closely aligned to law as possible. I'm not sure of what the solutions might be, but certainly collaboration and building alignment around that language to help the game, it sounds like a really positive initiative.
I watch a lot of NFL, but the referee turns his mic on, announces a decision. We're getting close to that. Our match officials, they have clear hand signals, but could it be a day where they actually announce to the audience their decision and maybe even explain it on the spot? Or I know there's some reluctance from match officials around that.
That's a really interesting question, because we literally discussed that yesterday because of the innovation for the November internationals, where the referee comms and the TMO comms would be broadcast into the Stadium Bowl. There was conversation about, which, during a TMO process, is it the whole TMO process? Is it part of the TMO process? And that's currently controlled by the broadcaster, or the in-stadium for broadcast by the broadcaster, for the in-stadium by the operations matchday staff. So, but the referees were concerned about, that they might want to make some of that conversation private, when you're talking between a referee and an AR right next to you. And particularly if we're disagreeing, one match official might believe it's a yellow card. Another match official might say, oh, no, for me, it's only a penalty for these reasons. Now, and then what was thrown out is like, what about if the referees could control with their own switch? Would that be better than somebody externally controlling it? So I don't, as we say, is that far away? It could be here soon if that's what the game demands, if that's what the referees are prepared to do. But we're certainly, as a group, trying to take a really open approach, because to go back to some of the things we've talked about, fan engagement, keeping the game relevant, helping the players, educating people, like all of these things are driving it. And I think we should be really open to what the future could look like for our game.
Suppose, Brendon, it doesn't help when you have incidents like New Zealand, Ireland in Chicago, where there was maybe 15 replays by the broadcaster on screen, but nobody in the stadium knew what was happening. The communications between the TMO and the ref weren't working. A ref has to run over to a monitor at the side of the pitch. There's been a lot of flack for that, but they're obviously the things that don't paint your profession in a great light. So is that something that gets discussed internally in your camps?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you'd struggle to find anyone that doesn't think that was an absolute disaster, what happened in that game with the technology. And I suppose the risk of introducing technology into the game is that occasionally there is failure of technology, and then that's not pleasant for anybody involved. I don't think fans would have particularly enjoyed the start of that game, the stop-start nature, the messiness. I don't think the players would have enjoyed that, the fans in the stadium, all the referees. Like, nobody liked that happened. And so to the question, is that the type of conversations that will happen and to improve? Absolutely. So that would be to find out sort of, I suppose, a bit of a investigation into what actually happened, what was the cause of the failure, how can we ensure that this does not happen again, because that's not a good advertisement for our game. And it was just incredibly messy, and ultimately we have referees who driven by the desire for the player safety and our responsibility to that, ultimately then ending up walking over to a sideline monitor to look at the medics replays to come to a decision. So look, that was really I think a disaster for everybody, and as a game and all of the parties privy to that, we need to be better.
So aside from the technical difficulties, the decision itself for a 20-minute red card, really, really tough decision. And I'm just interested, from my take of watching that, the decision-making process, the ultimate decision that was reached, is there an over-reliance within TMOs on the use of slow-motion replays? And I ask that because that is a great example, that tackle. When you watch it at full speed, which is how the game is played, you see a guy not expecting to make a tackle. When you watch it in slow motion, it looks terrible, and you see a guy almost, using the shoulder to make contact to the head, and I can see how you reach a red card. But again, I know a player view is the game is not played in slow motion. And so should we be asking TMOs to use more of the full speed camera, which is what's happening on the game, just to give us a reality check on what actually happened, what the reaction time was for the tackler in this instance, what the real life situation of the game. Is that something you do within the TMO? Is that written into protocol? Do you think it should be revisited? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. Overall, I agree. Yes, it is really important to consider not only the speed of the replay, I suppose, like making sure we watch it in full speed as it was, as it happened in the match, but watching different angles to see, what does this look like from different angles? Are there factors that maybe aren't quite obvious on one angle, but then on another angle you can see that there's a clear mitigation, for example. But the watching something in full speed is a part of the process, so we should be doing that as TMO within the replay. We also, just from trying to build some more process around that, where we're getting to is trying to watch a context angle first. So in the actual, we go TMO like this, and then we see the replays on the big screen. The first replay should generally be a context angle, and the broadcast they can go slow-mo. Generally, we want that sort of maybe at a 75% speed. So it's still close to full speed, but not so fast that it's like, wow, I need to see that again. So the balance is making, how do we get these replays done in the most efficient way? But generally speaking, we're trying to watch the context. Then we go into the detail of the contact point or the force of the head contact. And that's where, Conrad, we do see a lot of slow motion. We see a lot of pause on the point of contact, rock and roll, hitting, coming back. And possibly, as you say, maybe there's an over-reliance on that part of it. As far as the foul play review office is concerned, they've got that 8 minutes. They should explore it in a number of different ways before to arrive at their outcome. Because
there is the risk, like it distorts reality. Like the use of slow-mo, like you're suddenly slowing something down and then it appears different than what happened. I think there's been a number of examples, and you can find with clean-outs, with deliberate knock-ons, with all of these offences that we look at, and when you slow that down to an unrealistic speed, then you're suddenly seeing a picture that's quite different than what might have happened at full speed.
Yeah, I agree. And look, the intention, it's not the intention of match officials to be hunting for incidences or, I suppose, slowing things down to find things that don't exist. Sometimes match officials just get things wrong, a misjudgment or a missed factor or whatever it might be. I think in the particular incident we're talking about in Ireland, New Zealand, ultimately there's a judgment there to be made around the actions of Byrne and whether those are always illegal or is it just a collision. And so there are these judgment calls that are made by match officials as they adjudicate these moments as well. But your point is very, very valid, Conrad, is like, and perhaps we need to do some more exploration of this. But certainly if you're sitting on the fence between an outcome, probably watching it in real speed to make sure that we know exactly, okay, let's go back to basics. What does this look like live? What's the reality of the situation? Did the player have time to adjust? Was it just maybe a rugby collision or was it foul play? So I think the point is very valid, Conrad.
Okay, Brendon, well, listen, many thanks for that, because I think we got a really good insight into what you guys do in World Rugby with the referees. And, we certainly heard lots about the balance between getting the right outcome and the game flow. So many thanks from everyone at ERPA, and we'll no doubt talk to you again. Thanks to Brendon. Thanks as always to Conrad and Rachel. We'll be back soon with the next episode. And in the meantime, check us out on social media. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Apple Podcasts or Spotify so that you don't miss out. And there's always more information on rugbyplayers.org. That's it for now. We'll talk to you very soon.